Let's begin by reading this section. I desire then that in every place the men should pray, lifting holy hands without anger and quarreling. Also, that women should adorn themselves modestly and sensibly in seemly apparel, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or costly attire, but by good deeds, as befits women who profess religion. Let a woman learn in silence with all submissiveness. I permit no woman to teach or to have authority over men. She is to keep silent. For Adam was formed first, then Eve, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and became a transgressor. Yet women will be saved through bearing children if she continues in faith and love and holiness with modesty. In one of the things I read, there was a woman who was a Christian who owned a jewelry store, and some woman came in with an expensive fur coat and told her that she shouldn't be selling gold jewelry, and it certainly can't be worn in church.
Oh, great. Great.
Wow.
Yeah. So with all of the the focus on women here, starting in verse 9 to the end of the chapter, I had always totally missed verse 8. Did that strike anybody? I desire that in every place the men should pray, lifting holy hands without anger and quarreling. Isn't that striking?
In every place they should pray. So they get to be vocal and women aren't.
No, I don't think that's the point. Yeah, I think you're focusing on the wrong part, which might help us to, kind of understand what Paul is talking about overall.
What, the part for every place? And should
No.
be praying in every place or with hands?
Uh-huh.
Hands.
Lifting holy hands without anger or quarreling.
Isn't that striking?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Carmen, when you pray, don't punch anybody.
Yeah.
Quarreling. Yeah. I mean, why should you quarreling?
Why say
You're praying?
Why say lift holy hands without
Anger and quarreling.
anger or quarreling? What do you lift your hands
Isn't that
for?
an oxymoron or whatever they call it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it implies that people are lifting hands that are
That are holy, that
are not holy,
miserable.
to in anger to fight.
Oof.
Or to push people or to argue, or in any case, the implication is that instead of praying, they're being hostile.
Yeah, you can't pray when you're angry like that.
So this whole
Because
section,
who would you be angry with if your hands are up?
that's a good question.
Are you angry with God? Are you praying with anger? Like, what are you doing to me, kind of thing? I don't know.
Well, so we let's backtrack. So, I mean, this section is usually seen as like kind of a what is the word? Sort of a manual of church discipline, so men should pray lifting hands. So presumably if you don't lift hands when you pray, you're not doing it right. Women should be silent. Women shouldn't be teachers. Women, the dignity of a woman comes through childbirth, and otherwise, not so much, et cetera, et cetera. I think we've, all heard that. And then, elsewhere, you keep your head covered, and you're, don't wear gold, and et cetera.
I don't mean to be what do they call them? Cafeteria Catholic and pick and choose what I'm going to listen to. But I think if it's in the Bible, you kind of take it seriously.
Well, the question is really, what is Paul saying? Someone was discussing this with me, and saying, that she tries to tell, people who disagree with her that, this isn't good. And their response, Christians, and their response is, a rule is a rule. And so what's interesting about that is, we've discussed that, last week, the week before, is that Paul believes that the Mosaic law was imposed from without. It's a set of rules imposed from without, and rules that are imposed without create a knowledge of sin without providing, and a temptation to sin without providing a solution to sin. The only solution is based through faith through Christ, which means, going back to Jeremiah, that the laws are written in our hearts. So laying down a set of rules, seems very unlike Paul, although, obviously he's credited with doing it all the time. So I was thinking of the parts we've read so far, what theological justifications does he give for anything?
Well, he talks about Adam being the firstborn. Adam came before, and Eve came from Adam.
Mm-hmm.
That gives, males, starts the hierarchy.
What about from the beginning of the letter up to where we are now?
Oh,
Well, he talks about divine training that is in faith.
mhm.
The aim of our charge is love that issues from a pure heart and a good conscience and sincere faith. So God's law is written in our hearts. And then later he says that the law is not laid down for the just, but for the lawless and disobedient, etc.
Mhm.
So that's
So
the law.
basically, I think with the thing about the whole man standing with hands in a prayer position, I think he's trying to say, that we shouldn't be putting on a show for everybody, that we should be respectful to God and not be showing off or trying to get attention.
I think he's saying more than that people are being angry and quarreling, either when they
Yeah,
should be praying or when they
yeah,
are praying.
yeah.
And so,
But they're putting on a show. They're just trying to get some attention.
well, if you're putting on a show, you usually do it by pretending how holy you are.
Well, this
This
is it.
this
Yeah,
this seems to
yeah,
be showing everyone how unruly you are.
yeah,
So I'm
yeah.
not sure that's a show. I think that's a reality. But so I guess what's striking here is that in terms of theological statements, that's one. The second one, which is why we should pray for all and why we should pray for leaders, which by implication people don't want to do, is that there is one God. So he is the God of all, and he desires that all be saved. And because God is merciful, is he implicitly urges Timothy, and by telling his own story that he was a blasphemer and whatever, persecuted, insulted God, but that God gave him grace much more. Well, he deserved no grace and was given grace. That
Mhm.
we have to be cognizant, in disciplining others, that they can also receive grace and repent. And if they don't, then excommunication is the result. So those are so that sort of flows from the one God who desires all be saved. So those are the theological statements. And there, there doesn't really, the Adam and Eve may be a theological statement, but it also may not be a theological statement. So what strikes me, just given that, pray with holy hands, I mean, that's a really striking phrase, because ordinarily you don't, I mean, the ordinarily nothing need be said. And he's saying it specifically to men, and he's telling them, to pray with holy hands without anger or quarreling. So that implies that they're using their hands for something other than praying that they shouldn't be, like pushing people or threatening people. And when they are praying, if they are praying, that they're praying angrily and in a quarrelsome way. And so all of this suggests that there's an underlying context that we tend to overlook. So Paul is writing to Timothy. His laws imposed without versus written in our hearts is just very scantily developed. It's not very fully fleshed out, and it probably needn't be, because Timothy was mentored by Paul. So it's not that Timothy needs an introductory primer in Pauline theology. What Paul is trying to do is instruct him in how to deal with issues in the church in Ephesus, and it seems clear that there are some major issues. So we've already identified one, that there are uh, Jewish Christians who are focusing on the law and not in a return to the law, and Paul is strongly opposed to that. So then the question is, what is the other side, and who are they? So it struck me that we we hadn't discussed sort of the Ephesus as a city. And so Ephesus is the site of the temple of Artemis, or in the Roman pantheon, Diana, who is the goddess of fertility. And the temple is huge. The entire economy of Ephesus really depends on the temple. Pilgrims come regularly. And Ephesus is I mean, the temple is the cult of Artemis is dominated by females, by women. The priests are women. Prostitution in the temple is common. Sexual intercourse in the temple is common. Um, Marriage is not all together, is somewhat frowned upon. Paganism and the pagan religion permeates Ephesus, and is likely, elements of it are likely to have been brought by Gentile converts to the faith, and especially by women. And then we also have an issue of dress. Upper class prostitutes develop their sense of style and dress and whatever from lower class prostitutes. So most common was like braiding hair with gold jewelry and whatever. And then wealthy women developed their sense of style and dress from the upper class prostitutes. So we have wealthy women and prostitutes dressing like prostitutes. So the idea is that you dress to look attractive and sexually appealing. And Paul doesn't approve of that. The purpose of dress is to clothe you, not to tempt somebody. And dress is to be reverent because you're supposed to be worshiping God. So far, in that early part, he's really just telling people men to not fight, pray appropriately, and he's telling women to dress accordingly, appropriately, modestly. Everyone should be able to agree with that.
It's funny how he kind of attacks the women, but he doesn't really do that to the men. He just tells them that they should be prayerful and
yeah. He focuses more on women than on men.
But I don't understand the I permit no woman to teach, because usually when we're teaching children, and
Well, he's
not all
about,
men are cut out to be teaching children. Women are a little more compassionate and understanding of children.
Oh, you don't think we men are?
Some are.
We men
a
are
lot that aren't.
we men as a group are very, very patient with children and
No.
very, very compassionate and very, very gentle with children, and
Some people are. Some people are very good with them, but no, I'm sorry.
I think the context is he's talking about teaching the gospel.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
One of the things here is that we also tend to suffer a little bit from mistranslation, or poor choice of translation, and which tends to make what Paul is saying probably worse than it is. He says, start with the first part of the phrase, let a woman learn. That's a fairly striking statement, within the context of its time, because the value of women was only slightly greater than the value of a child, and a child was of no value at all. Children became valuable when they grew up. Until then, they were a waste of resources, a drain of resources, really, because I don't remember the mortality rates, but something like 60% of children were dead by like age 14, or age 16. And so in kind of a very explicitly zero-sum society, that means that the resources you spend on a child, the things the child consumes, are simply wasted. Resources are wasted that you really don't have. And so the so children are valuable when they by not being children and by growing up. And so women are also not very valued either. They're, just one step ahead. That's true of Judaism, where, in the synagogue, um, worship sort of morphs into Torah interpretation or interpretation of the law, and women aren't, you know, expected to, really allowed to interpret the law. It's a male prerogative. So women aren't expected to learn or be taught in Judaism. And in pagan society, um, that's also true of women, with the exception of, high-class prostitutes tend to be educated, and and they have considerable freedom. And some wealthy women have freedom, but by and large, women aren't educated. So for Paul to say that women should learn in its context is really a revolutionary statement. He believes that, women should be taught the faith. So let a woman learn, but the translation says that it's supposed to be in silence with all submissiveness. So the implication is that a woman is just supposed to be there and sort of, kind of like absorbed through a process of osmosis, be quiet and don't move and just soak it all up, soak it in.
Don't move.
Don't move.
Cook, clean, take care of the kids.
Take care of the kids. Yeah. Yeah.
But don't talk.
Right. Don't talk. So the silence is a mistranslation. The Greek word is besouchia, and it means quietness, it means tranquility, it means without contention. So it doesn't mean silence. And submissiveness is supposed to be an attribute of all disciples. You submit to the authority of Christ. In 1 Corinthians chapter 16, the brethren are to submit to those who lay down their lives for others. In Ephesians chapter 5, all Christians are to mutually submit to one another in the fear of Christ. James chapter 4, we are all to submit to the Lord. So submission is an attribute that is expected to be true of all believers. So he's saying that women should learn, should be taught, and should be submissive and not contentious. So that in turn, what does that imply?
I have a question now related to what they replied. I thought women didn't go through the same education as men, but I thought that they did receive some education.
If there was, well, most women didn't receive any education, and some wealthy women do. And if they are do receive education, it's largely, focusing on kind of household management type of things, learning how to be a better wife or a better household manager than learning, sort of religion or theology or anything, or practical business skills or things of that sort. There are always going to be exceptions, and wealthy women are more likely to be have some education than poor women for whom it's really precluded.
Because I thought the Virgin Mary went like I heard this something and I cannot do the citation of where I heard it, but I thought she went to the temple when she was young to learn. And the fact that when she like the um when she like the Magnificat, that she's like kind of doing a citation of a psalm, that
Mhm.
was kind of like like that she went through some education in her early ages, but I don't know.
Yeah, I would
Mhm.
sort of view that with suspicion. Um, I mean, her prayer, really reflects a dependence on God, that we see in the Psalms, although she's not really drawing on them directly, and also reflects a submissiveness to God. I'm not, it doesn't necessarily, I don't think, reflect, education.
I see.
So,
So in the household, the girls and women weren't read scripture then?
well, if they, I mean, well, I mean, it's hard to
I'm talking
say.
to Jewish, yeah.
Um, I, one of the rabbis said that, prayer, at least one of the rabbis in the Mishnah said that prayer, is a male prerogative, and like women should not pray uh, the daily prayers like Shema Israel, the Lord our God is one. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. You should love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind. That women shouldn't do that, or we're excluded. So Paul is advocating, believes that women should be educated in the faith, and so but the fact that he's saying without contention and with submission suggests that there is at least one person and possibly a faction that is not being educated uh, without contention and submission, which is to say that someone or some group is being contentious and unruly. So, I mean, so we have to be. The question here is always when we're reading a letter, and this is sort of very different from the gospel readings, or the gospels as a whole, which are really works of theology and teaching based on the ministry of Jesus. But here we're Paul's letters to the churches are addressing problems. So it includes some theology and includes some practical pastoral care and some practical problem solving. But the underlying motivation is a response to problems. Or Paul might. I mean, it's like Father Brad said, you don't want to get a letter from Paul. So then the question is, in whatever it is that Paul's writing, what is, what is obligatory in what he's saying, what is based on, sort of theological reasoning, what is mandatory. So for example, in the dress thing, is he saying don't wearing gold is impermissible? That's not what he's saying.
No, he's saying to not draw attention to yourself, to
Mhm.
be humble, just
Right.
yeah.
Dress so that you aren't trying to uh, get a man.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not a distraction.
You're not a
Yeah.
distraction. You're
Yeah.
not there to seduce somebody. You're
No.
there to worship God, and that requires modest dress. And that's not so much, a theological proposition as it is simply a practical one. The goal is to worship God, and you don't do that and that's not happening when people dress inappropriately.
Mhm.
So there's always, so when we look at something, we have to decide whether it's, sort of mandatory, and what is the purpose of the guidance, and if that guidance is, generally applicable, how is it applicable in our own day?
Mhm.
Right. So so he's not saying don't wear gold. That would be foolish. He is saying, and I mean, he's also implying, I mean, he's really saying don't flaunt your wealth. Don't, because you will, humiliate those who are poor and who can't dress very well because they don't have the means to do it.
Not a
So
competition. Yeah.
it's not a
Yeah.
competition. So that woman who, went in to the jewelry store and said, don't you can't wear gold in church when she has a
Fur coat on.
fur coat on, is totally missing the point. Her fur coat was the thing you're not supposed to wear. But, she suffered from excessive literalism, as many do.
And I
So,
think that's where, even the men, what is it called? The headdress.
uh-huh.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of the humility, right? That's where they cover their heads, and it's out of respect for God. I mean, it's respectful.
Well, I mean, within its context, I mean, you cover uh, long hair that was unbraided was seen, sort of as a sexual come on, and so you
The
cover your
braided,
head.
the
What?
braided one. The braided one was.
Braided or simply loose and
Oh,
not, in.
yeah.
So if it's braided with gold and, looks
Oh, yeah,
ornate.
yeah, yeah.
Otherwise, it's loose and long, and that's, sort of a sexual turn on in the context of its time as well. So that's why Paul urges, covering your
Mhm.
head, but
Mhm.
whether that's relevant to today or not, I mean, for the
Well, I
most
know
part,
when I go to Malta, there's a lot of the old ways.
yeah,
There's a lot of old ways. The boys are preferred. They get to go learn how to swim. The women have to stay home and help take care of the household.
right,
The
yeah,
girls, yeah, especially during the war, the boys went to school, the girls didn't.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I think, the whole thing about women covering their head is, sort of,
My mother used to slap a Kleenex on my head if I didn't have one on.
yeah,
If I forgot it at home, she'd
yeah,
say, "Oh, you have to put this on."
yeah.
Okay, mom. Okay,
I,
okay.
I think, I think that was a very culture specific reference.
It was, but then at the same time, they were yeah, they were pretty strict about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was, before Vatican II, it was, thought to be I mean, all of this stuff was interpreted as being mandatory. And, even in
But it was
Vatican,
respectful also. I mean, even in church today, we sit and chat with people before mass starts, and we should be praying.
there is a bit, there is too much talking. That's certainly true.
Yeah,
I mean, we
yeah.
could grow in respectfulness, but
Oh, you don't hear a peep when you go into the churches in Malta, everybody's so
yeah,
quiet.
the thing is that submission is necessary to learn, right? Because
Mhm.
if the goal is to learn,
Mhm.
then you have to listen to what's being said.
Mhm.
And if you aren't submissive, it's not going to sink in. Instead of that, you're going to be argumentative. So he's not saying to be silent. He's really saying to not be contentious and to be respectful, to be submissive in that sense, that you listen to what's being said. Also, being submissive within its context. So the cult at Ephesus is led by priestesses, right? And men aren't welcome. So some of the members of the assembly here are going to be ex priestesses
Mhm.
and probably ex prostitutes, or one hopes ex, but that's not necessarily, so you always bring some of whatever, whoever you were, into the present, right? So since the priestesses really controlled the faith in the temple of Artemis, they're likely to feel the same privilege as Christians, and so be argumentative, be combative, add stuff that is contradictory to Christianity, contradicts, is antagonistic to Christianity. And so it's very likely that that's what Paul is talking about. And what's really striking, I mean, in most of the commentary, is that there's no discussion of the temple at Ephesus and of priestesses at the temple of Ephesus, and yet that's the major uh, social, religious, and economic institution in Ephesus. The economy is almost entirely based on the temple. Then we have, I permit no woman to teach or to have authority over men. She is to keep silent. So the typical interpretation is that women aren't supposed to teach men, that usurps their authority. So only men can occupy the office of teacher, and women can remain silent. No women to teach or to have authority. First thing is, how do we understand the present tense of to teach? Is Paul laying down a current condition or a rule? So,
Or of a condition.
so I am now not permitting women to teach, but later that can change. Or I am not permitting women to teach, period. Those are, I mean, there's an ambiguity in the sentence. Well, how do we understand the fact that it's simply present tense?
It does say, I permit no woman to teach. So
Yeah,
it sounds like a rule.
but in fact, it's hard to say um, because it's simply present tense. And so, you know, is it for now and later? Is it only for now? Is sort of the issue. And then looking at the rest of so he permits women to teach either never or just now. And so this is sort of a, kind of a both and construct. And it's translated as have authority. The verb in Greek is authentein. It's translated to have authority. It's the only use of it in the New Testament. To exercise authority in the New Testament and Septuagint uses 12 different words. None of them are authentic. To rule or to govern, to exercise power over, has 47 words used in the New Testament and Septuagint, but none of them are authentic. What authentic means is would be more correctly translated as is to control in a domineering fashion or to domineer. So that's better translated as I either now or never will do not allow women to teach or to domineer men. So why would women domineer men?
Power.
Power.
Maybe she's been treated, maybe she's been ill-treated, and she wants to show that she's just as worthy of being in an authoritative way as he is.
This is, within the assembly, what would lead or would lead women to be domineering, some women to be domineering.
I guess it's just whatever's going on at the time, right?
Right. What's going on at the time?
Well, like you said, women are priests and
Women are priests,
taking
right?
over the men's roles. Yeah.
They're priestesses, and it's a female-dominated religion.
Yeah.
So they bring that into Christianity, and
Yeah.
so when attempts to teach them the faith are met with contention, are met with responding back, are met with you don't know what you're talking about, are met with I know, but you don't know, and so and so we can kind of begin to see the dynamic from earlier when Paul talks about false teaching and being really being a falling back on the Mosaic law. We can begin to sense tension between Christians, Jewish Christians, and Gentile Christians, especially women who were priestesses and women who were involved in the cult of Artemis, right? So we have these so people tend to fall back on their old ways in when there are tensions, right? And so we have an influx of these Gentile men and women, but the women particularly are coming from, some of the women at least, are coming from the temple of Artemis, and some are probably priestesses, some are probably high class prostitutes. And, they're bringing that with them. And so for the Jewish Christians, contact with Gentiles is, for Jews, contact with Gentiles is defiling. And so now you don't just have Gentiles, you have these priestesses and you have prostitutes. And they look like it too. And this is outrageous. The Mosaic law just prohibits this stuff, no contact with these people. And then you go back on genealogies and rules and whatever. And so you can see the basis for the conflict that's breaking out, that Paul is trying to help Timothy to address. So in saying that, don't domineering, nobody, no Christian should be domineering anyone else. I mean, obviously, we know it happens all the time, but nevertheless, nobody should be domineering anyone else. And Paul certainly didn't believe that anyone who is in Christ should be domineering. So given all of that, the sort of the implication is that women should not teach isn't a rule, it's a temporary condition. Women shouldn't teach because right now it's not working very well. All hell is breaking loose.
Mm.
And there's really an atmosphere of domination that is not conducive to anyone learning anything.
And that's why Paul letters are so, I feel like it's so misunderstood. I remember even like once in school, people saying that um like all the Christian religions were like didn't follow Christ, follow Paul, because Paul like kind of set up the ground for a lot of like not a lot of his teaching to the new communities and all that stuff. So they're like, oh, Christ was like, no, good, just peace. But Paul came and said, like, yo, that's what you have to do. And I feel like some
Yeah.
of these people really didn't read the full gospel, because a lot of what Christ said, people like, no, we cannot handle this. It's too hard. Or,
Mhm. Right.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
there
I
is
mean,
a lot of misunderstanding of Paul out there.
mhm. Yeah, that's very true. A distorted image of Paul, I would say, is very really well loved in many Christian circles. Paul is, I've said this before, but Jesus is seen as, a fool, an idealist, totally unrealistic, woke, um, who was, because he was the Son of God, was good enough to die for us. So his real contribution was that he died, which, is good. Nice of the guy. Go Jesus. But Paul was the real theologian, and Paul told us how to live the Christian life because Paul is a moralist. And, we like moralists. But the problem is that I don't really think that that's an accurate portrayal of Paul at all. And in fact, there's the whole thing about the law represents rules that are imposed. And what's really liked about Paul is that he imposes rules. So and most of those rules tend to be male centric, or give preference to men in a very big way, which is really well, historically we men have enormously appreciated it and benefited from it. So so I mean, a real number has been done on Paul, and it's in many ways, he's been dehumanized, and an important part of his teaching has really been lost. His humanity has been lost. The fact that he was, countercultural has been lost. A great deal of Paul has been lost. And instead we end up with this rigid moralist who really wasn't who Paul was, and who was not incompatible with Jesus. So then we get to Adam and Eve. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and became a transgressor. Why does he, any idea why he says that?
Well, she's transgressed from God's law, which was to stay away from the tree of knowledge. I mean, the one forbidden fruit. And she defied them.
But why does he say Adam was formed first, then Eve, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and became a transgressor? Was Adam a transgressor?
Yeah, he could say no, thank you, woman. I'm gonna eat I'm gonna eat a mango, whatever.
Right.
You
Adam
know?
was a transgressor.
He had
And,
free will too.
and Paul said that sin entered through Adam.
Oh, entered
So,
through Adam? Really? That's what he said
yeah,
in this?
yeah.
It doesn't sound
When
like that.
when he does typology, he says that,
He
yeah.
says Adam was not deceived.
He said Adam was not deceived, right? In Romans chapter 5, he says, therefore, as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin. And so death spread to all men because all men sinned. Sin indeed was in the world before the law was given, but sin is not counted where there is no law. Yet death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over those whose sins were not like the transgression of Adam, who was a type of the one to come. In 1 Corinthians, for as in Adam all die, so also in Christ shall all be made alive. So Adam indeed transgressed. He just doesn't say that Adam transgressed. So what he says is that Adam came first, and that
Since
the
Adam
woman,
came first,
the
Eve is
woman
supposed
was
to follow.
the woman was deceived and Adam was not deceived. So why would he say that?
I'm having a hard time connecting this with what you just said before. Though they're like the woman's like why woman's not supposed to cheat because like no, they're like new Gentiles kind of joined the faith and like they're not supposed to. But now I'm having a hard time connecting these two parts.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that portion where it says, for Adam was formed first, then Eve. It's like, he came first and Eve followed. So she was second. Like it's not
The hierarchy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the question is this a hierarchy or is this simple ordering that Adam
It's simple ordering, but I don't know.
does it imply a hierarchy?
Yeah.
The big thing about it, so he's really sort of summarizing Genesis and Adam and Eve to make 2 points. Adam came first and Eve second. Eve transgressed. Eve was deceived. Adam was not deceived. They both sinned, and in some ways, clearly being deceived and sinning isn't as bad as not being deceived and sinning. The implication of if Adam wasn't deceived, that he knew what was going on, right? So Adam came first. Eve was deceived. Adam was not deceived. So in Diana or Artemis were the result were the Artemis is a twin of Apollo that they resulted from the a union of Zeus and Leto. And so Artemis was first and Apollo second. So in the cult of Artemis, women, which is a women-centric cult, women are the leaders of the cult, or the priestesses, or the mediators between God and between Artemis and humanity, because Artemis came first. But Paul points out that Adam came first. So no authority is to be derived from the fact that Artemis came first, because Artemis didn't come first. Artemis, in fact, doesn't exist, but Adam came first. And Artemis could not be deceived because she's a goddess. But Eve was deceived and she sinned.
Yeah, it's just a sign of the times. Yeah, that's what I mean. It's what he's relating to is the times which they lived.
So Artemis was, thought to be superior to man and to men, and Eve isn't superior. And as Christian converts, Artemis doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
We have Adam and Eve and one God. And then the final thing, yet woman will be saved through bearing children if she continues in faith and love and holiness with modesty. So, one of the common interpretations of that is that women are saved by childbearing, but men are saved by grace. So here he's focused on the cult of Artemis again. So Artemis was considered to be the source of life, the one who nourished all creatures, and who reflected the power of fertility in nature. Women will be saved through bearing children if she continues in faith and love and holiness with modesty. Pagan women in labor turned to her for help, but she was a perpetual virgin who discouraged marriage and often punished pregnant women at the time of delivery by inflicting death on them. So if you're a pagan, you had better pray to Artemis that you survive and bear the child. So if you pray to Artemis properly and she answers your prayers, you'll be saved.
Oh.
But Paul is saying that that's really hogwash. You'll be saved by faith in Christ. Artemis is not going to do you any good. And he's also there saying, so Artemis was a perpetual virgin, and that marriage and asceticism was preferable. He's also saying that that's not true. That, a spiritual body physical divide is not desirable. And incidentally, the salvation is not the best translation. It's survival is a better one. So yet a woman will survive through bearing children if she continues in faith and love and holiness with modesty. So God is the protector and not Artemis. So this is, a very different interpretation than we usually get. But I think it's the correct interpretation.
When you understand what it was like at that time, you understand why he said what he did.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And what we can take away from it is that in worship, we should be reverent and respectful. We, shouldn't try to draw attention to ourselves. The purpose of worship is to worship God, not to meet our own agendas, whatever they are. We shouldn't be gaudy. It's not an occasion to show how well dressed we are, to humiliate others, although we should be well dressed.
Out of respect.
Either that, or we should be wearing sackcloth. Um, we in teaching and learning, we should be attentive. We should not be domineering. We should attempt to learn. Our goal is to learn, not to make a point or to prove how brilliant we are or anything else, or to be argumentative. And when we pray, we should pray and not fight. Don't strike people while you're praying. So, I think those are the real takeaways, but they're not exactly rules. They're kind of common sense modes of behavior that flow from love of God and love of neighbor. That you want to be submissive to God and submissive to the assembly. You don't want to be domineering. You you recognize that it's not about you, but it's about God. And so those, I think, are the real takeaways, and they flow from love of God. So here Paul is not the horrible sexist he's made out to be. And the whole emphasis on educating women in the first place is a very countercultural one that, for many of the men can be very shocking.
I'm just thinking, what can come up when you read without any context, and you know that's what because I wouldn't come up with any of what you're saying if I was reading on my own. That's why I'm like,
Right. Yeah. Yeah, we always have to remember that the author's intent and the author's context is the first starting point of analysis. So, when we just pick up the Bible, we usually miss the context, and just assume that everything means exactly what it says, which is almost never the case. So, and then, we have, sort of vested interest. Men are interested in maintaining male dominance. And, so that becomes a powerful incentive. Paul is, Christians have been concerned with interpreting Paul in a manner that conforms to the Christianity that they want, not the Christianity that Paul is calling them to. And, so we have the sharp divide between Jesus and Paul.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Is that light on still? Recording?
Yes, it is.